This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cali, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Special edition of the Baseline NBA podcast as we discuss the nail in the coffin for the Boston Celtics. A lot of stuff happening. Finally, the matchup that I'm sure everybody, if they weren't already predicting it from last year, and given what's happened in the offseason, I think everybody and their grandmama knows it was going to probably be the Golden State Warriors taking on the Cleveland Cavaliers. But we are not going to be talking about previewing that on this episode. No. I got to make sure we leave enough time on the tape to allow my man 50 grand NBA aficionado, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC, my brother from another mother, co-host, my man Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, to holler back at me and express his sentiments on what realistically was a successful season for the Boston Celtics. What's good, my brother?
I'm good, man. Salute to all the fans, listeners of NBA Baseline. And as you alluded to, man, yeah, this is another somber edition as we bid adieu to one of the better teams in the NBA. It's our beloved Celtics. You know, we don't get to show our fandom too much here on our podcast as we are a general NBA show covering all news and topics around the association. But we have a little special place in our heart for the Celtics, and to see them kind of get rocked out 4-1 against the Cleveland Cavaliers. Now we got to assess what they're going to do in the summer, bro.
Yeah, we'll get a little bit into assessing the Boston Celtics, what happened to them through the course of this Eastern Conference Finals, and obviously look at what the future beholds them. I mean, you talk about luck of the Irish. You know what I'm saying? You couldn't basically map out a better projection for a franchise that has a promising future to continue to be a antagonistic thorn in the side of the Cleveland Cavaliers and LeBron James and whatever he's doing with his legacy dominating the Eastern Conference. Is the Boston Celtics the only team right now in the Eastern Conference equipped to close that gap? We're going to definitely get into that. And then we'll also have a couple of news that that's happening so far in the association that we'll get into on the back end of our show. So once again, we appreciate you and yours for tuning in to the Baseline NBA podcast. Be sure to get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA or get at me at GameFaceLee. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. Available on all the major platforms. Available on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Microsoft TuneIn, Player FM, iHeartRadio, Google Music, and the Roku channel. So download any of these platforms and allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things happening in the association. You know how we do, and you know how we roll. It's time now for the breakdown.
Time to break it
down to the bone gristle.
Time now for the breakdown. Cali, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. And our topic of conversation in the breakdown is, got to bring in that theme music, Shaw, about,
Go on, get.
the Boston Celtics. It's that time for them, man. They have to just go on get, right? But let's first take a step back and really assess what this Boston Celtics team, has accomplished. And I got to tell you, underlying the idea and the perceptions that this was not a legitimate 1 seed in the Eastern Conference. If you kind of look back and see what the Boston Celtics had to do to bring themselves to this point, if you are a Boston Celtics fan, and if you're someone who remembers the old Boston Celtics teams, I think you have to feel pretty good about what this basketball team showed you. The scores will not depict the heart and the effort that this team tried to put forth in the course of really was an insurmountable situation, okay? The Cleveland Cavaliers have been at this before, Shaw. We know this. But what I was looking for from this Boston Celtics team was, are they prepared to play as hard and up to the task given the scrutiny and the perceptions that have been laid out for this team because they put themselves in the position of being the number 1 seed? And again, it's deceptive, but this Celtics team showed me a lot, even though the scores distort that idea about what this Celtics team tried to do in the course of this Eastern Conference Finals.
I don't think anything is distorted for Boston as a result of getting smashed. Really, I mean, this was not a competitive series. I don't think anybody really expected it to be. We kind of courtesy gave them 6 games in our conference
Well,
finals
I gave him
preview.
courtesy. You were thinking gentleman's sweep.
Right. I mean, that's what it was. I mean, I think I ended up saying, all right, well, maybe I'll go 6, just because the hit really showed me something in getting past Washington in the semifinals. But at the end of the day, we knew they were overmatched. And I don't think there's anything really in essence to kind of hold your head down about. They swept every other team, up until they got to Boston, and Boston was able to take a game without Isaiah Thomas in Cleveland. So that says a lot about kind of the moxie of this roster, right?
But let me ask you this question real quick, Shaw. Is it a question of whether or not this Boston Celtics team was outclassed or outmatched?
I don't say outclassed. I mean, they were just outmatched. They just don't have the horses, when it comes down to that. And I mean, you have to credit the Cleveland Cavaliers. They played at an elite level. They played at a championship level. And Boston isn't there yet. And yes, there were some faux pas defensively from Boston here in time, but they just didn't have enough offensive firepower to match wits with Cleveland when it came down to that. And the Caps were phenomenal for the entire series. I mean, Kyrie Irving, Kevin Love, LeBron James, they did what superstars, all stars are supposed to do.
So now we finally are putting them in that, and I don't want to take away from our emphasis about the Boston Celtics, but a quick point to what we're talking about here. And I think this is something that's going to lead into our preview when we talk about the Warriors and the Cavs. But this is what we are coming now to expect, that we can legitimize this threesome, this trifecta of LeBron James, Kevin Love, and Kyrie Irving in comparisons to, what the Golden State Warriors will bring to the table when they play each other in the finals.
I mean, yeah, they shot lots out. They
Well,
couldn't
but we
miss.
had always been saying that Kevin Love was, like he's the unknown. He's like, what I'm saying? He lives in the wilderness of Bosch. But what we're legitimately saying that what Kevin Love brings to the table now, legitimately, he is there now. Like he has to be there. If there's any expectation to really legitimize this matchup, this rubber match for these guys, he's there. And this series against the Celtics kind of puts that in his proper perspective that, he's there at this point. He's just not quietly hiding in the shadows.
No, I mean, and they found ways for him to get open and shoot threes, and he was aggressive. He stayed pretty consistent on the glass as well too. And yeah, he played a great series as well. Again, LeBron did his thing. Obviously, he took a little snooze in game 5, or sorry, in game 4. But nevertheless, what am I talking about? Game 3. And then nevertheless, then Kyrie Irving, did what he did in game 4 with his magic, and even in parts of game 5 as well too. So I mean, those guys are what it is, and Boston has to understand that, hey, they have a lot of growth to make up, before they're at the level of the Cleveland Cavaliers. And, not to beat a dead horse that we're going to beat anyway, but it just kind of goes to show that, okay, if they acquire Jimmy Butler or Paul George this year for that number 1 pick now, which ended up being Markelle Fultz, they still wouldn't have beaten Cleveland. Maybe they get another game, but they wouldn't have gone on to beat
I think
Cleveland.
one thing that we did agree on that sentiment was if this is not somebody that legitimately is going to be a game changer for the Boston Celtics, you really run the risk of damaging the cohesiveness that this team has built through the course of the first part of that regular season, because the Boston Celtics really figured out a way to turn it on and put themselves in the best position possible to do what I think a lot of other teams wish they had an opportunity to do, which is figure out a way to leapfrog past the Cleveland Cavaliers. And if it came down to eventually playing the Cavaliers, you want that home field advantage. What I feel like is so distorted, though, about this Boston Celtics team, Shaw, and again, this is the reason why I brought up the question about Kevin Love, is, Kevin Love, the combination of Kevin Love and Tristan Thompson almost gives the sentiment that whatever the Boston Celtics do with this draft pick, there's going to be a shadow being cast upon the money that they spent to bring in Al Horford. Because Al Horford is an adequate player, but it almost feels like we got him on the back end of his career. And I don't know if whether or not that's going to mean anything significant, because I felt like what Al Horford should have brought to the table is bring a level of cohesiveness, solidarity, and a little bit more toughness to this Celtics front court, when in actuality, I feel like it's brought more question marks going into this offseason about what the Celtics need to do to address the one thing that they could have. I don't know if the Cavaliers is something that would have exposed it completely, but we said going into this that they had to get something out of that front court to even be able to stay with these guys. And clearly he was outclassed. Al Horford was just straight up outclassed this series. And you're expecting me to say in the next couple of years, if the Celtics put themselves in this position again, you're going to rely on Al Horford figuring out a way to turn this around when Kevin Love's at the prime of his career. Tristan Thompson's not even 30 years old. You know what I'm saying? Like, things like that is what's making me stand out about what are we looking at with this Celtics team?
Well, I mean, I get that, but I mean, he's definitely a piece. He's not the answer, and I don't think anybody realistically should have thought that he was. I mean, you had to look at this and say, I mean, and I said from the very beginning of the season what he was going to bring. He was going to bring a veteran presence, a guy who can be a calming force, is a great character guy as well, and somebody who will get you a couple extra wins in the regular season. Wish that happened, but you'd probably see his true value in the playoffs. And for the most part, that happened too. They're not in the conference finals without his play, especially in the first round when they were down 0-2. And obviously he played, pretty well throughout the semifinals as well. And you're right, he didn't play great versus the Cleveland Cavaliers. But that just goes to show you again that he is a piece, a good piece, but not the answer to what they're trying to do. And that's why I keep saying Jimmy Butler or Paul George even added to this wouldn't have been either. They're really 2 moves away from being a legitimate NBA title contender. Like I really believe that. And it depends what they do with this draft pick and Markelle Fultz. And it also depends what they do in free agency because they have a lot of cap space. But you do kind of have to wonder because usually when we do these things, we're talking very next year. And the Celtics probably have a very interesting window because the year after next season, a bunch of their players are free agents. David Bradley's a free agent. Isaiah Thomas is a free agent. And Marcus Smart's going to be due for his extension. All these kind of peripheral pieces and obviously stars in the case of Thomas and Bradley, for at least for the Celtics standpoint, those guys are going to be free agents. So next year is massive for the growth of what the Celtics are going to do. So what they do this summer really is going to have an impact on how this franchise is going to matriculate for the next 2 or 3 seasons.
All right. So when we talk about Brad Stevens and the way that he has been able to manage this basketball team over the course of the last 3 years, okay, you have to commend him, right? It's phenomenal the work that he's put forth to maximize and get as much as he can with this revolving door of a rotation, because at some particular point you have to feel like if Brad Stevens has a lineup that he can really put his imprint on, like a starting lineup he could put his imprint on, we're going to always continue to applaud him for what he does with these guys coming off the bench. But I have to think to your point, like, is he not working, backwards to forward, so to speak? Like most guys have their imprint on the team, the starting 5, and then it's a matter of getting what he can get out of these role players, bench players. It feels like outside of Isaiah Thomas, and to your point, maybe Al Horford, and maybe some degree Jay Crowder, I feel like he still gets more from his bench players at times than he gets from his starters. So when do we start seeing that come to fruition? Is that more so from Danny Ainge, or is it really the belief mode that Brad Stevens has got to find another diamond in the rough that's going to step up like a Jaylen Brown or some sort that's going to emerge the same way that maybe Isaiah Thomas emerged with his relationship with Brad Stevens?
I think it's a combination of all of those things, and I think it is for most teams in general. Like you want to be able to have a coach and a system that can develop young guys, and you kind of have that plug and play, if you will. And we all know the Spurs kind of do that the best. And I think Brad Stevens is kind of getting that. He is maximizing the potential out of whatever guys that Danny Ainge puts on this roster.
Look, man, if Brad Stevens had, I'm not saying like a lineup like Steve Kerr, but he had a workable lineup, we could be talking about how the Celtics could have like the lineup depth lineup of death. Excuse me. Try saying that 3 times fast. But you could have that kind of lineup under Brad Stevens, and this team would probably be pushing the Cavaliers to 7, no question. He seems to find a way to get the role players to play at a very high level, and he knows when he needs to pull those guys out there and put the guys in that he thinks can finish the job. And that's just something that you just can't continue to dive into. Well, obviously not having Isaiah Thomas doesn't help that as well either. But I'm just saying that, it to me, it comes out, full-fledged when you look at this series. People are, again, they may be looking at the numbers and they're looking at blowouts. But what I'm saying is this is exactly the shift that we've seen opposite side of the Western Conference of, where we're starting to see that shift take place with the San Antonio Spurs. And when we talked about that with them in our previous show with Greg Popovich, about how we look at the rest of these players that Greg Popovich has worked with, and we didn't really recognize and realize, to your point, Kawhi Leonard is just that damn important because Greg Popovich is having a hard time trying to pull what he was so easily getting from guys outside of the three that he had in this era of basketball. Brad Stevens, I'm wishing, is probably saying to himself, damn, if I just had, my core players playing at this, then I could work with the role players that I have.
And that's the sign of a great coach, really, who has the ability to, again, just play with what he's got and make it work one way or the other. And I think the roster has improved over the course of the time that he's been there, and he's improved as a coach. And so it's been a win-win when it comes to that for the Boston Celtics, no matter what. And they really have an opportunity now to make a big splash this summer with that pick, with a lot of cap space, only $71 million in cap holds right now, with projected cap of $108 million. So they can go out and get two guys if two guys were available, or to try to make some trades as things happen. Again, we've talked about it offline. Well, we know guys like Amir Johnson and Jonas Jerebko probably will not be back. Definitely not at the price tag that they were paid this season. Maybe Jonas, he was only making $5 million. But they have a big decision to make with Olynyk this summer to figure out, okay, are they going to keep him? But again, James Young, guys like that, Gerald Green, those guys are going to be out of here. But the big thing that we've talked, again, I think we talked about offline, is some of the guys that they stashed last year when they had 3 picks, whatever it was in the first round, in addition to the maturation process of Jaylen Brown. But what is the guy? He's like the French Paul Millsap or whatever, Gershon Yabusele or whatever his name is. Mm-hmm. That guy, he's supposed to maybe come back. I know he just had ankle surgery or something like that, or remove some bone spurs, but he should be good to go for next season. Potentially, maybe he fills a roster spot. And then obviously the big center that they're very proud of and seem to like, there's no doubt they're bringing him over next fall for the season, Ante Zizic, and he's going to be playing and potentially manning the middle and filling the minutes that Amir didn't really man that well for Boston this year. So I think they have some opportunities to make a quick, I guess, run and gain some ground on Cleveland immediately. But again, it still depends kind of what happens with that pick, and if they're able to get a Gordon Hayward or a Blake Griffin or whoever that you really feel like out there can be impactful and fit within Stevenson's system.
All right, so let's go ahead and let's talk about the impact players that the Boston Celtics can possibly look for in this offseason. Now, a lot of speculation has been out there about the Celtics really trying to go after Gordon Hayward. And, we don't really touch much on this. I think this is a great opportunity for us to be able to do that. To your point, what you said earlier before about, if the Celtics pulled the trigger on bringing in Paul George or Jimmy Butler, that wouldn't have been enough to get past the Cleveland Cavaliers. So here we are at this point. And if we're now in the offseason and they have an opportunity to be aggressive, is Gordon Hayward a step in that right direction? Omitting the idea that they didn't want to go after Paul George or Jimmy Butler because the price was too high in trying to make that move and pull that trade. Now it's a question of, is Gordon Hayward an answer to what you're talking about? Or what kind of guys are you thinking about saying, bring me this dude? And now we're talking about putting them like right there, on the precipice of pushing the Cavaliers.
Well, and that's the problem. It's really Gordon Hayward is the only real name out there. Blake Griffin eventually is going to be there. Chris Paul, and like Chris Paul, it doesn't seem like that's a situation that's going to work out. So it really is between Gordon Hayward and Blake Griffin. Unless you're able to make a trade, you feel like the Millsap thing is, he can fit in any system, but you just don't know if he's going to want to come and play with Al again. Are the Boston Celtics
really trying to, live vicariously through through the soul of the Atlanta Hawks?
Hawks, yeah, I know. Again, so although I really like Millsap, I just don't think he's life changing, if you will, franchise changing for Boston in that regard. And he's already 32 years old as well too. So I just feel like they're not going to really be in on those sweepstakes for whatever reason. So I think their two main targets are Hayward and Griffin, and they just have to see if Griffin would be a real fit alongside Al Horford.
But are what we,
field pieces after
but
that.
are what we're talking about, Shaw, are upper echelon, let's say top 30 type player that it is a must that they are throwing this money out towards. In other words, when they signed Al Horford was not a top 30 player, right? But to your point, he brought certain things to the table that certainly has made us have this conversation about the Boston Celtics legitimately being one of those teams now that has as much opportunity as any of the other teams now that just made the playoffs to really, be in the conversation of, can they do something against the Cleveland Cavaliers? But my point is it's not a question of throwing out the money. It's a question of the personnel that addresses what this Celtics team is clearly lacking in relation to, say, the Cleveland Cavaliers. If we're saying that the Cleveland Cavaliers is one of the most offensively potent teams, and obviously it's because of LeBron James, and you got Kyrie Irving, the closer, Uncle Drew, and you got Kev Love. But what we're talking about here is it's either a question of, do the Celtics want to run with the Cavaliers offensively, or do the Celtics want to commit to having better defense against the Cavaliers? Then what components are we talking about when we talk getting guys like Gordon Hayward?
Well, Hayward is a guy who does play both sides, so he kind of fills both needs for you, and he's a playmaker on top of it as well too.
And so he helps shift Crowder down to the 4 position.
Yeah, Crowder would end up playing some small ball 4, I think, in a lot of different lineups, that Boston would be running. So to me, he is the most attainable guy that they can go after. Again, the Blake.
What about Gordon playing the 2?
But then you're kind of shifting Bradley out of the lineup or out of the rotation altogether.
Are we talking about Bradley still being there? Do you think that the Celtics now have to really think about the idea of moving Bradley, who's going to obviously be an available free agent after next season?
I think everything is on the table.
Right.
I don't think there's anybody in the roster that's untouchable, and that even includes Isaiah. It would be an incredible PR to move Isaiah after his All-NBA season and all the things that he did to get Boston to this point. But I don't think anybody is off the table for Boston. So, when it comes down to it, the thing is like next summer is really the summer where there's more people available, but next summer is where they're going to have the most questions in terms of, retaining guys and how much money they're going to want to spend to keep the players that they have currently on their roster. So I think, again, it's something that they are going to have to investigate, whether they move. They move Bradley. Do they do some sort of sign and trade with Kelly Olynyk? What do they do with, the Terry Roziers of the world, if you will? Marcus Smart, is he, really part of this future? And I think right now I think they all are. But outside of that, Gordon Hayward and Blake Griffin are probably the only two, if you said top 30 type NBA talents out there, they're the only 2 guys that are realistic options. Chris Paul, Kyle Lowry, those guys aren't necessarily coming. We don't think Paul Millsap is, that we just said that's not the answer. Do you think Gallinari is a top 30 player? I don't think he's a top 30 player, but is he somebody who could fit into the system in Celtics? Maybe. So, again, there's not a lot of great options. You just have to wonder then, like I said, and we said it previously on the draft lottery show, I think Boston really has that other ace in the hole with the Celtics, with the Brooklyn Nets 2018 draft pick, and that's the pick that they may use to try to pry somebody loose from a team that may have a top 30 player that might be on the move.
All right, so we break it down, to the bone bristle. We talk about this Boston Celtics team, Shaw. One last question before we wrap this up. When you look at what happened here, and listen, the Celtics, in my opinion, had a very successful postseason. And I think this was so important for the Boston Celtics. It's not just about the players, but it's about the mystique about the Boston Celtics. Because this is the same team that was an added thorn to the mentality that emerged of what we talk about with LeBron James. LeBron James doesn't go to Miami until he feels the frustrations of playing against the Boston Celtics. Before, it was just more so the Orlando Magic. And once the Boston Celtics started putting their roster together, just brushed them to the side. And then just when LeBron has this window of opportunity going to the finals, right, in 2007, all of a sudden the Celtics now are going to be a thorn in his side for the next 3-4 years. You know what I'm saying? So that to me is why it was so important for the Boston Celtics. But when you look at this playoff run by the Boston Celtics, Shaw, who made the significant leap that you feel the utmost confident will be the one to watch for when we start talking about training camp? We talk about the regular season, tip off of the regular season. Like, who should we be keeping our eye on who kind of made his presence known, his presence felt through the run in the playoffs?
You talking about from the Celtics?
For them Celtics.
Yeah, it has to be Jaylen Brown. We had some conversations like a week or so ago where some agents and things were talking about, oh, well, they don't want their guys to work out for Boston because they don't want their guy to be Jaylen Brown, where they're not getting plus minutes and able to showcase their skills immediately. Well, Jaylen Brown, got some great playoff run, shows that he's a competitor, went in there and played some very great plus minutes, in the time that he was able to get out there. And I think he'll probably go to Summer League. And he'll try to get better. And I think they have a lot invested in Mr. Brown and how he's going to be able to move forward. So to me, he's definitely the one to watch. And I think, when I said it on Twitter too, and he's not a young player per se. I mean, he's been around for a little while now, but still only 26 years old. But even the guy you just mentioned, I think Avery Bradley acquitted himself pretty well throughout these NBA playoffs and stepped up as a leader. He was doing all the post-game pressers and things of that nature. And remember, I spoke to him earlier in the year as well too. And I was really impressed with how poised and how mature he's become, or at least maybe just more vocal. Maybe that's what it is, because I think he's just been a more kind of a reclusive guy. But he's a leader now on this Boston Celtics team, and he's a spokesperson, and he carries the banner. But he also has the guy. He might also see the writing on the wall too, as you alluded to. Maybe he won't be there, moving forward. But if he is, I think that's somebody that you're definitely going to see working hard, because he'll be in a contract year. He alongside Jaylen Brown, I think they're the two guys for me to watch for Boston.
All right, the Boston Celtics, 53 wins in the regular season, top 10 team in scoring, top 10 team when it came to in assists. Hey, this has been a great season for the Boston Celtics, getting themselves all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals. Unfortunately, their run to the finals has been cut by the King. A little Game of Thrones action shot that we saw on Instagram with the King, with LeBron James looking like the Winter King. Shout out to Bleacher Report. They've been getting Brody with their graphics. But definitely great amusement nonetheless. So for the Boston Celtics, time for them to hitch up the wagon. And in the immortal words of our people who love to throw out that liquid gold, it's time for the Boston Celtics to just
Go on, get.
You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Breakdown.
Coast to coast.
Time now to go coast to coast discussing the news that's happening in the association. You ready to rock and roll, Mr. Shaw?
Absolutely, man. Let's ride.
All right. Minnesota Timberwolves howling, boy, barking. They want Derrick Rose. Derrick Rose is a marked man right now. Come out that Knicks uniform, and all of a sudden, man, he looks like a completely different player. What do we make about the Minnesota Timberwolves, Tom Tibbs, reuniting with his MVP point guard?
I think, it's a rumor that we saw in the middle of the season, and we're like, okay, why? But hey, Tibbs seems to like him too. And then the fact that he's also getting some interest from the San Antonio Spurs as well, which does make a little bit of sense to me. In terms of, you can think he kind of was like how Tony Parker was, just with more athleticism. And I think they could help him with his shot there as well too. So Derrick Rose getting some traction out there in the free agent market. How about that?
Hey, a big physical guard, if he stays healthy, can certainly shore up a lot of the question marks that the San Antonio Spurs are going to have in this offseason at that backcourt position. The Chicago Bulls are expecting Dwayne Wade to exercise his $23.8 million player option. Is this a good or a bad thing for the Chicago Bulls?
I think it's bad for the Bulls, but we all
When is anything ever good for Chicago, man? Damn.
We thought Wade was all but gone, though, right?
Can somebody whip out the Michael Jordan voodoo doll? Seriously, these people, they need something pop not promising when it comes to Chicago, because nothing ever spoken on anything radio-wise or sports-wise about the Chicago Bulls is good, has not been good for like the last 12 years.
And what it boils down to is just, again, they're not going to give up. And this is what we talk about all the time with these franchises and teams. They just don't know when to cut the cord. And they just hold on and hold on and hold on. And again, Wade has the option. So this is him holding on because he doesn't think he can get that much money on the open market going on out there. Again, I was listening to a show earlier on. And I was like, listen, the only thing he would do is if the Miami Heat were to say, hey, a welcome back deal somewhere in the neighborhood of $15 to $18 million, maybe he would do that. But he's not going to get that anywhere else other than Miami. So he's got to stay in and take this $20+ million from the Chicago Bulls.
All right. Out in Boston, not that we were trying to add more fuel to the fire, but it's something that we like to chuckle at every now and again. Danny Ainge, president of basketball operations for the Boston Celtics, confirms that Lonzo Ball will not work out for the Boston Celtics. I'm stunned, Shaw. I'm floored. No, I'm not.
This is
really.
that whackness, bro. This is that whackness. And not to say that Celtics should, to be taking Lonzo one or another, but they should be able to evaluate. And the fact that LeVar is the one that's really kind of pulling the strings here, that's unfortunate because you just want to be able to get your son or get your player in the best opportunity and best position available. And whatever, I guess he doesn't feel like that would be Boston. So the Celtics will move on, and they may not. They still have the right to take him. So him not coming to work out, that's just on them. But it definitely does put a kind of a hitch in whatever plans that Danny Ainge might have had in terms of his evaluation process with Lonzo.
Hey, look, I don't have a problem with it. It's one less person that I need to worry about Danny Ainge even considering. But there's always a consequence for whatever choices that you make, and consequences can be good and consequences can be bad. I think in the long term, when you talk about the perception and you talk about the mentality that a basketball player needs to have as far as being a franchise player, these are one of those things that I think is going to doom and probably haunt Lonzo Ball in the years to come. And his work is going to be cut out for him, even if he does get drafted by, per se, the team he wants to go for, which is the Los Angeles Lakers. All right, the Atlanta Hawks still making moves. A few weeks ago, we talked about how Budenholzer is no longer president of basketball operations and head coach. They stripped him of that title. So walks in Travis Schlenk as the GM. Actually is a pretty good hire when all things considered. If you cannot be the Golden State Warriors, best to take any assets you can to become like the Golden State Warriors.
Man, Warriors are getting people jobs, and we said that just on the thing on the last show.
I need to go send my resume to Golden State just so they can go find me some positive work.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, hey, I think Mike Brown's going to be a hot candidate one way or other in some form or fashion.
Again?
Especially if, yeah, well, I mean, again, we talked about it. If Steve Kerr doesn't come back for the NBA Finals.
When did these guys learn? When does Gentry and Brown just learn, man? Just like seriously, like just chill and just and soak in the glory, man.
He might. And I said, I just think that he's going to have options if he were to try to, if he wanted to lead that coaching tree to some degree. But nevertheless, hey, great hire for this roster as they move forward, and we'll see how it all works out over the summer.
Look, man, I want these guys to maintain being a coaching tree, not a dead branch. Okay, that's exactly what happens if these guys try to go and sprout on their own. Chill, just sit back and just watch all of the amazingness. Everything is so effortless. Why they got to make things so damn hard? Damn coaches. Anyway, interesting topic for the Los Angeles Lakers. Magic Johnson looking at his roster, and of all the players that he believes is untouchable for the Los Angeles Lakers, it's that lanky boy, their first round draft pick, Brandon Ingram. Can we complain? Are you complaining, Shaw? Do you think that is an actual good look for Magic Johnson to say of all the players on the roster, Brandon Ingram is the one that's untouchable?
It's interesting that you come out and say that. I mean, openly. I think with general managers, maybe that's when people make calls and inquiring. That's what you tell them. But for that to kind of hit the open market, it's a little strange, especially going into the draft and going into a summer where a lot of speculation is going to be around what the Lakers are going to do. So, but we've seen it. I think we've seen the writing on the wall with this. They're not going to stand pat and just, we're going to build quietly and get better. F that. They're not about that life at all. They're going to try to make a move quickly. And that, I think, D'Angelo Russell, Julius Randle, it might spell trouble for those guys. And they may be packing their bags sometime over in LA. All
right. Well, there you have it. All the news happening in the association and a lot of stuff going down, man. Again, like all eyes are going to be on the finals, but damn, we got to wait a week for that to happen. So we might as well just throw out there some really good tidbits that's taking place behind the scenes.
As always, brother. As always, and it's always a pleasure to go here and dive right in to all the action that's still surrounding the association, because, again, the playoffs haven't been exactly what we wanted them to be, but moves are still being made off the court with the other rosters. They try to catch up, to the two dominant forces that are Cleveland and Golden State.
Well, everything, and again, Shaw, from the, when you look at it aesthetically, when you just look at it for what it is, yes, the playoffs have not been amazing. They've been subpar. Maybe that's because of the hype and the talent that has kind of come through over the last couple of years, and what those teams have looked like. But there's always storylines that seem to emerge. It's just that they're taking a little bit longer to kind of grow. I think there is a level of we're not as patient as we normally are, because we want this to continue to grow. But I think something is emanating right now. In the next couple of years, we talk about teams like the Bucks, we talk about the Celtics, right? We even talk about the Washington Wizards. Before, we probably couldn't even mention 3 teams, because whatever the 3 teams were in the previous conference playoff runs were not legitimate, and we didn't believe that they were going to be legitimate when we talk about the Atlanta Hawks, the Toronto Raptors. And now all of a sudden, we're talking about how the competitive gap is starting to close a little bit with those teams. Like, the more teams that are starting to fight, the more that they begin to realize they want to be the top dog to try to knock off the king. And I think that's a good thing. It's just unfortunate that it's going to take a little bit longer for that to really come to fruition.
Yeah, it does going to take a while, but I think now you kind of see. I think this playoff run, if nothing else, especially in both conferences, really, not especially in both conferences, teams now see, okay, what is it really going to take? How do we do it? And again, that could be good and bad, because as we talked about Boston not making any real moves because they didn't feel like, okay, you know what, they were just going to play their hand and see where it led them. You just wonder what other teams are going to say. It's like, all right, are they going to take a shot? Okay, we need this many players to make it happen, to feel like we really have a chance. Or again, as we've alluded to many times, are people just kind of waiting it out? So either way, I think we've gotten some good traction to find out what these teams may be doing in the future.
Most definitely. So once again, we'd like to thank you and yours for tuning in to our show. Be sure to get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA, or get at me at GameFaceLee. The show, the Baseline NBA podcast, available on Twitter at NBA Baseline. Be sure to check out our upcoming show, where we will preview the epic matchup, the rubber match, the trinale between the Golden State Warriors and the Cleveland Cavaliers. Will this be the last time? I certainly know that between these two teams, there will be no love lost, and we will spare nothing in our assessment about who we think is going to hoist that trophy when it's all said and done. For the Baseline, Cali, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. You know we do, and we'll catch up with you next time.